Hello, I'm back. Today's topic won't be a nice topic by any means, but that I'm really sorry for. But it's something I had to really talk about regarding this, which I haven't been think has mentioned much elsewhere. That is the ongoing affair. Hilam Johnson said in 1866, the first casualty when war comes is truth. Is apt to all of what I'm about to talk about. It is not an easy conversation to have, yet others have been so easily accusatory with regards to Ukraine-Russia conflict. As I said, truth is often first thing to be sacrificed when the last option, when all diplomacy fail happens, war. This conflict is no exception. The battle line physically is Ukraine and Russia. The propaganda battle lines is Russia, China, and other state powers aligned to Russia diplomatically, with Ukraine having its propaganda support US, UK, Australia, Taiwan region, Japan, and so on. Going outwards of the state propaganda and media, actual combatants and governments, we then have social media, which is also taking biased positions and dealing with the cross exchanges, which comes with civilian discussion regarding the now 2 days of hot war between Ukraine and Russia. Because of this, I'll be sensitive to things and keep things short and to the point. The core issue is often not understood as it goes back for years. The point of where we are now did not come from nothing. Ukraine, on many aspects, modern Ukraine can only exist because of Russia post World War II. Half of Ukraine came from the Russian Empire. The other 4/5 remaining came from communist leaders. The final first segment came from the weakness of late USSR with Vishism, or more simply, the later core. So more simply, the small core existed in 1654, going up to 1917, with the Russian Tsardom giving the northern Ukraine money to Ukraine. Lenin in 1922 gave the South Ukraine to Ukraine minus Crimea. Stalin gave more land to Ukraine in the West between 1943 and 1945, with the final addition to modern Ukraine Crimea being added in 1954 by Khrushchev. This makes Ukraine territory not that uniquely Ukrainian in terms of territory. Much of the pipelines, much of the land, much of the position was a Russian design. So then use it then so then to use it to antagonize Russia, when Russia was the only reason they exist today, is in the historical context. This is why Russia cares so much about Ukraine. So Ukraine was built by Russian hands in terms of its modern borders. Even their capital is in the hands of land handled by Russian Empire. Kiev was the center of the core land given by Russian Empire. Original Ukraine is now just center of modern Ukraine, not that near the capital. This does say though, not that there isn't Ukraine culture. There is. And over the years, it developed a distinct culture. Ukraine is in turn is unique, but its uniqueness was enabled by others to support their self-determination. Cold War Ukraine was an SSR of the Soviet republics. After the Cold War 1991, it was made a country separate, and for a time it had been a fast military, high technology military, but it was expensive. So then they cut back to focus on economy. Also, not after the 90s, NATO was expanding, The pledge to not expand NATO outside of Germany was breached, with an extra 14 nations is added to what was the original NATO in the Cold War. The issue here is that even with the expansion of nations, the purpose never changed. It was and still is anti-Russian. Russia suffered a lot during the Cold War. Eastern Europe suffered a lot during the post-Cold War, sorry. And for many years, Russia was not that efficient. It was lazy. System which the US installed in Russia made it inefficient and hostile, corrupt, and antagonistic to its USSR roots, which made it powerful and a superpower in the first place. Russia came at a time where it wasn't. Putin came in a time where he wasn't a communist, but he wanted to have national rejuvenation of the Russian nation. In that extent, Putin did some positive things and negative things, but ultimately he did renationalize some critical industries and things which were ransacked during the post-Cold War period. The curves in the Russian state that was being inept was being straightened. The military and our prospects was being enhanced. The prominence was increasing. Russia, though, was far from perfect. Russia, though, still is far from perfect, as the damage done by the oligarchy is clear, and there is very clear signs of Western degeneration in parts of Russian society. That is still an ongoing issue. Just because Russia had a rejuvenation does not mean it was wiped clean of all previous issues. It just means it was going into a new era. The reason I said this is because Russia had territory in other areas which makes Eastern European countries at its height. Ukraine included. Crimea and Donbass are examples of this, having more prominent Russian culture and language rather than Ukrainian. Crimea was reintegrated into Russia. The Donbass did the first move to what they are now, an independent separate area from Russia and Ukraine, but close ties to Russia. The reason why this matters is because in 2014, there was a coup in Ukraine which enabled and empowered neo-Nazis and fascists. In 2014, the Donbass region started autonomy changes, forming their own militias, making their own anthems, flags, and so on. The reason why I did this was because Ukraine, under a more hard-right pro-US government, was suppressing Russian language areas and doing minor cases of cultural genocide. This thing to this day is China, as Russia was being antagonized by Ukraine and NATO. Ukraine asked to join NATO. NATO didn't say no, which prompted Russia to reject Ukraine joining NATO. This whole affair could have been averted there and then. NATO, with NATO saying no and understanding the realities of what would have Ukraine as a NATO state, that would be to say it would completely cut Russia out. And ultimately, it'd be a serious risk to Russia's national security. Putin said this way: after the 2014 coup in Ukraine, part of the population did not accept the outcome. Let me remind you, this was an anti-constitutional blood-shedding coup which killed many innocent people. It was truly an armed coup. No one can argue that. Some of the country's citizens did not accept the coup. They were residents of Crimea and the people who currently live in Donbass. Those people declared that they were establishing two independent republics, the Donetsk People's Republic and the Lugansk People's Republic. This was a point of confrontation started between Kiev officials, the people living in that territory. However, Kiev officials have conducted two punitive operations on those territories, and apparently we are witnessing a third escalation. All these years, I'll be stressing the people living on those territories have been literally tortured by consistent shelling and blockades. As you know, the people living on these territories close to the front line are, so to speak, were in fact forced to seek shelter in their territories, in the basements where they live with their children. The use of Ukraine as a tool for confronting this country, Russia, of course, presents a major and serious threat to us. I've said many times before, if Russia faces the threat of Ukraine being accepted into North Atlantic Alliance, NATO, the threat against our country will increase because of Article 5 of the North Atlantic Treaty, which states all countries of the alliance must fight on the side of a co-member in the event of an aggression against it. But since no one recognizes the will expressed by the people of Crimea and Sevastopol and Ukraine continues to insist that it's Ukrainian territory, there is a real threat that they will try to take that territory they believe is theirs with military force. And they do say this in their documents, obviously, then the North Atlantic Alliance will have to get involved. This is where the history of modern Ukraine as territory matters. As Putin said also regarding sanctions, the sanctions pressure first is absolutely illegitimate. This is a gross violation of international law, which those who are now talking about it only care about it as if it's when it's beneficial for them. And when it is not beneficial, they are happy to forget about all the public norms of international law. We understand this very well. Unfortunately, we have been living in a paradigm for years, many years now. Because of the powers that consider themselves to be masters of today life, they always interpret everything in their own favor and neglect the interests of others. But there's only one way to overcome this state of affairs: to strengthen ourselves from within, primarily, of course, in economic sphere. You're talking about sanctions. Sanctions will be imposed anyway. There is some excuse today, for example, connected to the events in Ukraine, or if there's no such excuse, it'd be found found to go somewhere else. This is where Russia's end. This is Russia end. Ukraine matters also here as a fault, as much of the fault falls on them. Ukraine had at first antagonists to Russia, wanting to stamp out the two republics. Ukraine then refused to understand Russia and still insisted on wanting to join NATO. This is the second time they could have restored itself here, as if NATO if Ukraine decides to abandon that ambition, relations would still be tense, but it would still be serviceable and even repairable. If at the earlier points of now resolution happened, hot tension would never have happened, in my opinion. The Russian Communist Party, the second largest party in the Russian Federation, sent a request to Putin to recognize the Donbass regions with sovereignty. The reason for this was so that regions could ask for assistance in aid or peacekeeping and military to stop Ukrainian assaults. There was a speech in which Putin expanded the situation himself. The next day, the two republics were recognized. Ukraine then did their final blunder. Not only did they not accept the result, but wanted to actively undermine Russian security council by comparing them to a virus which cannot be cured. When Ukraine called Russia a virus which cannot be cured, that was when the moment there was no way out for Ukraine to avoid what was going to come. And any peace or negotiation or recognition was out of the window. So now we come to the past few days where Ukraine was where quickly banned men from 18 to 60 from leaving Ukraine at all, making it impossible for them to flee. Next, Russian advance started. The advance started on the border. The troops from Ukraine was either defeated or they surrendered immediately. Within one day, the Ukrainian Air Force was defeated. What happened next gave the true nature of Ukraine. Instead of allowing innocent people to leave, did the opposite. The president encouraged people to take up arms, giving free weaponry to anyone who wanted it. That was followed by more Russian advances. Some Russian air casualties, but also some Ukrainian neo-Nazi divisions were wiped out. The main reason why Ukraine messed up here is because the value of life was discarded when it came down to conflict zones. There was a call for mass mobilization, a social media and media campaign to have both sympathy for Ukraine and a Cold War equipment being given out to untrained soldiers. This tactic shown one, people were not allowed to flee. Two, the Ukrainian president made a do or die position for a lot of innocent people. Three, the tactic of arming no people who have minimal arms training made them then civilians into a combatant in status. And four, the president's own mindset to never surrendering, even when the armed forces was being beaten back and low-grade conscripts was to quote unquote defend the capital. So low, in fact, that there were some who were 21 and only ever shot 16 bullets in their lives, yet were positioned to guard the capital against invasion when the soldier has no battle experience. This is such a mindset is really quite dangerous. War is bad for everyone. Those who relish it from the sides are just as responsible for the bloodshed as the people who push propaganda to tell you to fight in a war which have no stake in. War creates trauma. War prisoners, death, innocent lives being lost, damages the cities, towns, and villages, and most of all, hypertensions and extreme reactions from almost everyone remotely involved. The campaign by Russia to attack fascists in response to events had some that being called imperialism by people who reject the reality of events that led up to what happened, or the alternative, did not care, thinking only in the short term. Some who also support the overt aggression or glorification of violence, those kinds of people should have known where to talk, as to glorify death is to not understand or care about peace. Truth is often too murky for most to realize and understand. So often they go to more simpler things, more easy to explain stances, more whitewashed stances, which often ignore the root causes and blame one side exclusively for everything. For why the conflict is not good, it could have been avoided. If it wasn't now, it would be later. As Ukraine shown intent to not care about de-escalation at all previously before the hot war. What happened is tragedy, but let us not fall into traps of them thinking that it is a glory, for life lost is tragedy. Life being forced to exist in a war zone is a tragedy. People trapped in a war in and around a war zone is a tragedy. The only way this be resolved itself as quickly and effectively as to minimize the damage done to people physically by displacement, destruction, and death, and mental with trauma and PTSD related issues. Let us not worship war, but also war sometimes is inevitable. And if there has to be war, let us hope it is swift and the pain is minimal, for the damage done even after a short war will linger on. And this is my message ultimately. People need to understand that the victims of war are many. It can be conscripts, innocent people, people who have to fight when they don't want to fight, people who, even people who are victims of propaganda. War is by its nature destructive, not helpful, which is why war is when all diplomacy fails. And my prime message here is, let us not worship violence, death, destruction. That's my message about this. And sorry for also late uploads. I'm now in uni proper, so that's something else which is taking priority. And this message is what one might put out for now. And in the future, when I can, I might put out some more stuff. But uni is my priority right now. And I hope everyone had a lovely day anyway, despite all of the rampant hyper aggressiveness on TV or social media that you may have encountered.